Welcome. This video will introduce you to the React Context API. Context API is a feature in React that simplifies sharing data between components. This allows sharing data across components without having to pass props manually at every level. The Context API is a React feature that allows you to share state between components without having to pass props through each level of the component tree. It eliminates prop drilling, which we'll discuss shortly, and creates a global state that is accessible to any component within the tree. The parent component provides the data through the context, and any child component can access it directly. One of the primary reasons to use the Context API is to avoid prop drilling. Prop drilling occurs when you need to pass data through multiple levels of components, even when some of the intermediate components do not need that data directly. This can make your code harder to read and maintain. Instead of passing props down manually through each component, you can use context to make the data available to any component that needs it, regardless of its position in the component tree. Let's look at how to create a context. First, import the createContext function from React. Then declare a constant variable and assign createContext function call to it. Finally, export the context so that other components can import it. To create a context, you need to import createContext from the React library. You then call createContext to create a new context. It's common practice to name the context with a descriptive name, such as useContext, and then export it so you can use it in other components. To make the context available to your components, you need to wrap them with a provider. The provider component is provided by the context you created. It allows you to supply a value that will be available to all child components. To use the provider, import the context and wrap it around the components that need access to the context data. The value prop of the provider is where you pass the data you want to share. This data can be anything, such as an object, a string, or a number. The provider makes this value available to all of its child components, no matter how deeply nested they are. To access the data provided by the context, you use the useContext hook. First, import the useContext hook and the context you want to use from the file it is located in. Then call the useContext hook and pass the context you want to use as an argument. The useContext hook returns the value provided by the nearest provider above it in the component tree. This allows you to access context values directly in any component without prop drilling. Here's a complete example of how to use the Context API. First, create a context using createContext. Then, create a provider component that wraps the components that need access to the context data. Finally, create a consumer component that uses the useContext hook to access the context data. This allows you to share data between components without prop drilling. We first create a context, then wrap our components in the provider to supply the data, and finally consume the data using the useContext hook. Here are some best practices to follow when using the Context API. Do use context for global state, such as themes, user authentication, or language preferences. Do use context when multiple components need the same data and prop drilling becomes cumbersome. As a tip, consider splitting context by concern. For example, separate user context from theme context for better performance. Don't overuse context for local state or frequently changing data that causes unnecessary re-renders. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit CodeLucky.com for more such useful content.